There are few franchises in the world of gaming I enjoy more than Metroid. Its revolutionary game design, nerve-wracking environments, massive arsenal of weapons and power-ups, as well as masterfully designed worlds for you to jump, crawl, slide, roll, and blast your way through have changed the way I look at video games. The Adventures of Samus Aran may not be as popular to a mass audience as Nintendo's other franchises, but the badass missions Samus has endured over her 36-year run in gaming have left a massive mark on me. And today, I'd like to talk about my history with the Metroid franchise and relive some of my favorite memories with the series. So without further ado, let's do this. My history with Metroid starts in the same way I'm sure lots of gamers of my generations did, playing as Samus in the Super Smash Bros. Series. I was always enthralled by Samus's intriguing design, awesome abilities, and vast array of weapons. So when I began my journey of collecting retro video games, one of the first franchises I wanted to explore the history of was Metroid. Only a couple days after getting my first Nintendo Entertainment System, I found a beautiful copy of the original Metroid, and I couldn't have been more excited to play it. The only knowledge I had of the Metroid series outside of Super Smash Bros. Was from YouTube videos I had watched about the franchise in preparation to play my first game. I had heard of its incredible gameplay that helped design its entire own subgenre of gaming known as Metroidvania. And don't worry, the franchise that represents the second half of that phrase deserves its own video in the future. I was going into Metroid on the NES with very little knowledge of what was ahead of me. And for the most part, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Metroid on the NES was designed to be played without a map or any sense of what to do or where to go. You are truly lost and alone in an alien world trying to survive. And as you progress, you become stronger and gain abilities and power-ups that help you progress. But as you become more powerful, the world and its enemies fight back even harder. And it wasn't lost on me why Metroid became such an iconic franchise. But that didn't mean I had the best time playing Metroid on the NES. Playing the original Metroid today is hard to recommend as your first experience with the Metroid franchise. For one main reason I mentioned earlier, the game has no in-game map. And because of the technical limitations of the NES, the winding and nearly endless corridors of Zebes look mostly identical. And in a game where backtracking is 100% necessary, considering you use abilities and power-ups found throughout the world to access previously inaccessible areas, a lack of a map makes this backtracking nearly impossible. To make the situation even worse, Metroid was released in an era where games featuring battery saves were few and far between. So to access your progression in the game, you would need to use a migraine-inducing password system to access your save data. It may seem like I'm hating on Metroid on the NES, but I promise you I'm not. I fully understand why this game is as loved and acclaimed as it is, and I couldn't be more thankful for the endless innovations it brought to the world of video games. But that doesn't change that this game in its original form is hard to recommend today, and it just hasn't held up the same as other games in the NES era. If you want to experience the original Metroid, I'd recommend playing it on a version that has the ability to save your data, such as the NES Classic or the Nintendo Switch Online NES catalog. Or, even better, play its incredible remake on the Game Boy Advance Metroid Zero mission. Regardless of my so-so first experience with the franchise, I was in no way deterred from wanting to experience more Metroid. It wasn't long until I picked up Metroid's direct sequel on the Game Boy, Samus Returns. Sadly, Samus Returns suffers from many of the same issues as the original, along with a handful of new issues due to its release on an even less powerful hardware than the original game. I honestly don't have a lot to say about Metroid 2, as I haven't played it in a very long time. But what I can say is its 2017 remake on the 3DS is phenomenal and is one of the best 2D games in the Metroid franchise. If you own any form of the 3DS or 2DS, I implore you to play Samus Returns. You won't regret it. So even after 2 poorly aged entries in the franchise, I still wanted to experience more Metroid. And what I had heard is games in the franchise continued to get better and better with every release, which would lead me to hunt down the next game I'd like to talk about, which has gone on to become one of my favorite games, if not my favorite, of all time, Super Metroid. I will come right out and say it. Super Metroid is the greatest 2D game of all time, period. There isn't a single thing I could complain about in Super Metroid, and truly an endless amount of things I could rave about. First thing I'd like to point out is the story. Super Metroid picks up right where the other two games left off. Throughout the first two games, Samus stopped the evil space pirates from harnessing the power of the Metroid on Zebes, with Samus defeating the space pirates and their leader, Mother Brain, in the process. Return of Samus sees Samus traveling to the Metroid homeworld, SR-388, to wipe out the entire Metroid population to prevent anyone from ever trying to harness the power of the Metroid again. But right as Samus is about to destroy the final Metroid egg, it hatches and assumes Samus to be its mother. Instead of destroying the Metroid, Samus takes the baby to the Ceres space colony to be studied for the betterment of the galaxy. But right as Samus leaves to go back to doing her badass bounty hunter stuff, the space pirates attack the Ceres space colony, slaughtering the entire population in the process. And yes, you heard that right. In a game released in 1994, an entire colony of human beings is slaughtered by space pirates. And Nintendo didn't even try to hide it. When Samus comes back to the colony, there are dead bodies everywhere. This is even featured on the title screen. Well, after facing off with Ridley from the first game and getting destroyed swiftly, he escapes with the Metroid baby and flees down to Zebes, the same planet you explored in the original Metroid. The opening ends with Samus barely escaping the Ceres space colony, which is in the process of self-destructing. After her narrow escape, she follows Ridley down to Zebes to reclaim the Metroid and stop Ridley and the rest of the space pirates. I bring up the story in such detail because it is truly one of my favorite things about this game. It is not lost on me that this game was released in 1994, and stories this mature were incredibly hard to find at this time, let alone on a Nintendo console. The story sets up the perfect atmosphere for the adventure you're about to embark on. And once you land on Zebes, you are given absolutely no direction, same as the first game, but this time you don't feel lost. I can't explain it in any other way than to say that because Nintendo had so much more horsepower to work with on the Super Nintendo, they were able to make a world that never felt repetitive. So as a player, you could differentiate the environments. Oh, and you also have a map in this game, which helps. For my money, there is no better feeling in the history of gaming than feeling your progression through a Metroid game. The feeling of finding an unreachable area and then finding a power-up or ability and racing back to that previous area to see if that is the thing that can help you progress is truly one of the best feelings I've ever felt in a game. And the amount of times this happens during a playthrough of Super Metroid is incredibly impressive. The gameplay itself also feels so much more refined in Super Metroid, ranging from the controls, which are mapped to perfection on the Super Nintendo controller, the variety of enemies you encounter, the diverse regions of Zebes, and the intimidating bosses you conquer along the way. I also adore the lack of written story throughout Super Metroid. You genuinely feel like you are writing your own story throughout your adventure, and it ends in one of the most climactic endings to a video game ever. One last thing I'd like to point out about the greatness of Super Metroid is how it set up the rest of the Metroid series along with countless other games for success with its easily adaptable but hard to master gameplay framework. There have truly been a countless amount of games that have took inspiration from the design of Super Metroid, and its imprint on gaming and its high praise as one of the greatest games of all time is well deserved. These are just a few of my memories with the Metroid franchise, and trust me, I could go on forever. I would love to talk about the Metroid franchise more in the future. So if you have any games you'd like to hear me talk about in the Metroid series, please let me know in the comment section below. Also, feel free to comment your memories with the Metroid franchise so that we can all talk and reminisce together. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next week with a new video. And my name's Oliver. I'm the Retro Gameboy, and I'll see you guys next time.